Hi, I'm Phillip from RealPolitics, here with Rick Tyler, who's a former communications director for the Ted Cruz for President campaign earlier in this campaign cycle. Mr. Tyler, thanks for speaking with us.
It's great to be here.
Awesome. So first of all, I just wanted to kind of talk about last night's speech from Mr. Cruz. It's, a lot of people thought it was a great speech. It had a great theme for the convention, but a lot of people were very angry about Mr. Cruz not endorsing Mr. Trump as part of the speech. And what we heard last night from a couple of journalists is that it appears that Mr. Cruz had not cleared that with the Republican National Committee, that they believed that he was going to make an endorsement. Looking forward to 2020 for Mr. Cruz, I just have to think that decision might cause some ill will in the eyes of some Republicans. What do you think of that, the decision from Mr. Cruz?
Well, first of all, the campaign was made aware that Ted Cruz was not going to endorse Donald Trump. Ted Cruz told that to Donald Trump in person in Washington, D.C. a few weeks ago. They had a conversation 3 days ago in which Ted Cruz repeated that he was not going to endorse Donald Trump. They offered him a primetime slot. They approved a 12-minute speech. Then they increased it to 20-minute speech. The speech went to 21 minutes, largely because of applause. And before the speech was loaded into the teleprompter, the campaign had signed off on the speech. They knew exactly what he was going to say, and that it didn't include an endorsement. So there was no bait and switch. They knew exactly more than once that he was not going to endorse, and they chose to let him speak at the convention. By the way, he never criticized Mr. Trump. In fact, he congratulated him, and some people chose to be angry that he didn't full-throatedly endorse Mr. Trump, but you'll notice that Paul Ryan really never full-throatedly endorsed him either, not in the way he did with Mike Pence last night or the day before. No, it was last night. Yeah.
So why do you think that there was so much, let's just say, a ruckus on the floor after Mr. Cruz, left the floor after his speech?
I think the Trump campaign believed that he would ultimately change his mind and endorse, but that Ted Cruz, there was no reason to change his mind. The facts hadn't changed. He said he was waiting and listening, and when they, hope against hope, thought that he would endorse, and he didn't, they chose to embarrass him. So they coordinated some people to start booing.
So I would assume that you're not a fan of Mr. Trump or the Trump campaign, right? Given all the stuff that happened in the campaign cycle.
I like Senator Cruz in watching and waiting. This campaign, from a PR perspective or a communications perspective, there's been no message coming out of the campaign. The only message that's getting through is, you may not like Donald Trump, but he's not Hillary Clinton. That's not a winning message. There's been no real discussion, messaging about jobs, the economy, how we defeat ISIS, the things that people are really concerned about. Instead, we've been consumed with what will amount to be trivia, which is lifting of Michelle Obama's words from her speech in 2008 by Melania Trump, and now Ted Cruz giving what was a terrific and bold speech, but didn't endorse Donald Trump. And so, Trump has a chance tonight to change that. We'll see if he does.
So let's actually talk about Donald Trump and the way in which he's communicated with the American public throughout the election season. And I actually want to relate it back to Mr. Cruz earlier in the election season, because back when he started his campaign, he started by painting, I think it's a fair characterization of his comments, he started by painting Mexican immigrants as rapists, as criminals, and some, I assume, are good people, statements like that. Towards the beginning of the campaign, though, the Cruz campaign took an angle that was very much, we support Mr. Trump, we like Mr. Trump, we like the message that he's promoting. And towards the end, of course, we heard that tone change, especially as Mr. Trump became more personal in his attacks on Mr. Cruz. Why did that message change across the campaign? Was it just the move to personal attacks? Or if Mr. Cruz believed that Mr. Trump was promoting a message that was way, way off, why were those statements made earlier in the campaign?
So to understand that, first of all, when Mr. Trump has his language is imprecise, and it's not thought out. He speaks off the cuff. So when he says things like they're sending their rapists, I don't think that he meant that all Mexicans are rapists, but because his words were sloppy, people were able to say that. But secondly, you have to understand the way the campaigns work, and that is the first thing they need to know about you is your name, because they can't vote for you if they don't know your name. Then they have to like you. People don't vote for people that they genuinely don't like. Third, they have to know what issues you stand for. And fourth, they have to know how you're different from your opponent. You can't do them out of order. And so other campaigns, we were 17 people running, other campaigns had their candidates go out immediately and criticize Donald Trump, who had a 98% name ID. And people liked him because he was a reality TV star, and they'd known him for a long time. So when an unknown person attacks a known person, there's a lot of danger in that. So we had decided that we weren't going to attack Donald Trump because people didn't know who Ted Cruz was and what he stood for. And that bared out in the first debate. The first debate, there was 26 million people watching. We took a poll about the same time. And even though all the media was saying that Donald Trump is taking all of Ted Cruz's voters, it wasn't true. There was only 4% of Donald Trump's voters who even knew who were supporting Ted Cruz. Everyone else didn't really know who Ted Cruz was. He was the most Googled candidate in the first half of the debate because he gave consistent, smart performances in the debate, and people wanted to know who he was. Now, as the campaign progressed, more and more people came onto the campaign, like Ted Cruz, and when we got to a certain point, we were like, okay, we've got through the name ID phase. We got through the fact that we had a lot of polling that said people like Ted Cruz, they like he's a principled conservative. Then it was time to contrast who he was compared to Donald Trump based on policy. So Ted began to outline different policy differences between the candidates, and Mr. Trump didn't want to do that. He wanted to get very personal. And so, in the campaigns, people say a lot of things about different policies, but then some things are off limits. Attacking someone's family, which Trump did consistently, was off limits. And then calling Ted a liar. I don't know what Ted Cruz lied about during the entire campaign.
So actually on that, in terms of calling Ted Cruz a liar, I just recall there was that video that went online towards the end of the campaign where Ted Cruz, he comes out, he tries to speak to Trump supporters, explain his positions, explain what he differs with Mr. Trump, and then some Trump supporters respond by just saying, lie and Ted, right to his face.
Now, do you know on the wall that Donald told the New York Times editorial board he's not going to build a wall and he's not going to deport anyone?
You're lying. Once again, lying Ted!
Well, sir, actually, that's a total lie made up by Donald Trump's campaign.
Lying Ted.
No! Let me ask.
Career politicians have killed America!
I honestly thought it was pretty scary. Honestly, pretty frightening. But Mr. Trump successfully mobilized millions of people, many of whom did act in that way. And so I guess what I want to ask off that is, do you think that there's been lasting damage so far as a result of to the Republican Party's brand, to the Republican Party's image, as a result of Mr. Trump's run? And where do you think we move from here? In the instance that Mr. Trump didn't end up winning the election in November, where does the Republican Party move from there to, I guess, eliminate the chances of that happening again?
There's only damage into the extent where there's not a replacement story, right? So it depends on whether we have a replacement story that's bigger than the last story. So people can say the Republican Party is XYZ, that they aren't welcoming to immigrants, et cetera, and all those things are true. It's not that they're not welcoming; it's that Republican parties has been poor at reaching out and including non-white voters. Trump's has his strategy. He's not going to win by winning the Hispanic vote, right? That wouldn't be a strategy for him because there's not enough time for him to do that. He's not going to win by winning the African American vote similarly. He could win if he turned out enough white voters, many of whom have sat out a lot of elections, who've been frustrated over the last 8 years because of the economy. If he can do that, then he may successfully become president of the United States. But then there'd be an opportunity, if he so chooses, to really fix the brand problem with the Republican Party and minorities. But and it exists because the Republican Party does not communicate very well why the Republican Party is the party of success. like if you want, no one wants to be poor, right? And the Democrats' answer is just, give them public housing, give them, food stamps, and tell them to vote Democrat, and that's their answer. The Republican Party's answer should be, if you want to be successful, there are a series of habits that we can help. One is a college education, one is to work hard, one is to show up on time to work, follow the rules, don't break the law, and you can get ahead. Most people in life don't stay poor all their lives. They start out working at minimum wage jobs like I did, and they work their way up, and they accumulate skills and knowledge that people find valuable and are willing to trade their dollars for. That can be a successful message, but I think we're a long way from that right now, because there's such a distrust. There's no relationship that Republican parties have, and I think actually Chairman Priebus had done a very good job of reaching out, but a lot of Donald Trump's rhetoric has been isolating, alienating, and divisive. So it could change, but we'll have to see.
I want to cross to Governor Pence. Trump picking Pence as VP. He's a Midwestern governor. He certainly wouldn't say the things that Donald Trump has said in terms of being as divisive as Donald Trump is. Does the pick of VP Pence lend credibility to the campaign, do you think? Or do you think that Donald Trump will just continue to overshadow that if he keeps on talking to the media?
Well, look what happened just yesterday. Mike Pence was nominated Vice President of the United States. It's a very big deal. And he gave a very good speech, and nobody's talked about it all day long, like almost literally, because he got overshadowed by the conflict between Senator Cruz and Mr. Trump. Mike Pence is a good guy. He has great character. He doesn't have a great legislative record, not in Congress, and in the state he's done some good things in the state. I think he's been an okay governor. He was in risk. I mean, he had a pretty good challenger. So I don't know what Mike Pence adds, because to me, Donald Trump has based his whole campaign on sort of blowing up Washington and reforming Washington, which would require bureaucratic reform. Bureaucratic reform would be enormously painful, and all the special interest groups are going to make a lot of noise. We've heard all the rhetoric before. Children will be dying in the street. They're going to cut this. They're going to cut that. But those reforms are necessary, and it doesn't strike me that Mike Pence is that kind of a revolutionary or even understands how to win that argument with the public, because that's in a constitutional republic. You can't just go to Congress and pass things. Congress reacts to their constituencies. That's how we got welfare reform in 1994. You don't get welfare reform by counting votes and getting your caucus to vote the way you want. That doesn't work that way. You have to go convince the American people that you're right, and then the American people put pressure on their members, and the members react accordingly. The way the system is now, essentially the members react to a lot of special interests and lobbyists in town who pay for their campaigns. That system is corrupt. It should be changed.
So I want to also talk about Melania Trump's speech to the Republican National Committee. The media definitely latched on to the fact that I think it's pretty clear that she did plagiarize some sections of the speech from Michelle Obama's speech at the 2008 Democratic National Convention. And of course the media latched onto it. But what was interesting to me was to see the response from Paul Manafort, from Chris Christie, and others within the Trump campaign after that occurred, where they just said it didn't happen. Didn't happen at all, and nothing. It was a ridiculous idea that she would plagiarize a speech knowing she was going to give it to 35 million people. And we were talking to Trump supporters out in the street, and they're just like, there was no plagiarism at all. I feel like the Trump campaign is making a bet that the American people aren't going to do a fact check. And so my question is, do you think that's true? Where do you see it from the perspective of somebody working on messaging? How much do you think people are paying attention to the actual facts of the matter and doing their research versus just taking what the campaign say at their word?
It's both. So what happens in a situation like that is the campaign, in this sense, it was almost Orwellian, the way they were in denial. You didn't hear what you hear. I'll tell you what you hear. Now, a lot of the people the Trump supporters, as you ask them, they're going to carry the party line. But the problem was they didn't even have a party line. So Christie went out there and Manafort went out there and in an Orwellian-like way denied it ever happened. And then others went out there and came up with a variety of excuses for what had happened, and no one was on the same page. And the problem with that is because they don't have a comms team that understands that here's what happened. Let's decide what to do about it, and then let's tell everybody what we're going to say about this. Now, in this case, it was clear that it happened. It was you don't get it 23 consecutive words from the current First Lady to potentially the future First Lady that are precisely the same, with thematics that are the same, and the storyline's the same. They were clearly lifted, and it turns out that she actually lifted them, that she had read Michelle's speech, was inspired by it, read those same lines to her speechwriter. Her speechwriter wrote them down. They ended up in the copy, and Melania read them, knowing they were Michelle's words. Now, I don't know why she did that, or maybe she didn't understand the implication of doing that. Maybe she thought, well, Michelle Obama said them and they were nice, so I'll say them and they'll be nice. I don't know. But we don't take other people's work, particularly when we describe our life experiences. Right. And when the campaign finally decided that they had to, sort of come clean and admit that it happened, the story went away almost immediately. Yeah. But that's what could have happened immediately. They could have explained what had happened, and people would have said, we're sorry, it shouldn't have happened. It did happen. But it was also part of the fact that the family so she wanted to make the speech her own, so she, by her own words, was saying that she was working on it herself in particular and had her own writer. And then one of the family members was in charge of that process, but the family member, who had no experience in politics, didn't know to check. And so that's what happened. And it seems like the Trump team trusts their family to make decisions, but don't trust people who have experience to make decisions, and that's when mistakes can happen.
So that's one thing that's frightening to me, certainly, is the reliance on the family. But another thing that's frightening to me was the fact that it did seem among Trump supporters that absolutely passed muster. That, the campaign said that. I don't know if they
believed it, though, because when you get onto a campaign and the campaign says this, a lot of people just toe the party line. I don't think that's the right thing to do. I think we ought to know what's true and what's not true. But when things become hyper-politicized, you get sort of a bunker mentality where, like, the media's against me, against us and our candidate, and they're against, and we have an opponent who's against us, and they're going to use this against us, and that's why we're not going to admit to it, right? So anytime a mistake happens, the more you can minimize it, so that it doesn't become an issue where your opponents use it against you. That's why you see politicians, baffled all the time when there's what are seemingly simple questions to be answered. They can't answer them because they don't want to get on tape something that the other campaign may use against him, even out of context.
Okay, so that's one thing in terms of campaigns. I actually want to explore that a little bit more. Certainly the Trump campaign has used that excuse a lot. They said it's just a liberal media. That's what they said in the case of Melania Trump. That was their response. So when you have a powerful woman standing up to Hillary Clinton, the media takes her down. At the same time, I think there's been a bit of a narrative in conservative media over the years that says basically that the mainstream media is unabashedly liberal. They are always liberal in vast majority of cases, and the conservative media is the only true media for conservatives. Do you think that also has contributed to, I guess, the media division that we have today, or the ability for campaigns to scapegoat the media rather than answering a straight question?
Both sides do it. I mean, the left scapegoats the media as much as the right. Hillary Clinton hasn't given a press conference since last year. She's not exactly trusted by the media. Now, when I grew up, there were 4 channels. There was the 3 network channels and the public channel, and the news was controlled by very few people, and everybody sort of got the same news. We now live in a world where you can wake up every day as a conservative and never listen to a liberal point of view because you can just tune it out. You can listen to Rush Limbaugh, you can read the Drudge Report, you can go to National Review and just immerse yourself in conservative thought. When I grew up, we had very little of that. We did have National Review. That became in the form of a magazine. You can see it in a museum. And it's the same thing is true for liberals. They can wake up every single day and never tune into Rush Limbaugh, and never watched Fox News, which is centered center-right. I wouldn't call it conservative, but it's center-right. We didn't have any of those choices then. So the conservatives have got a lot more outlets than they have in the past. But I find, reporters in general, are there liberal reporters? Sure, they have a liberal bias, but most reporters' bias is for news, right? What's news and what's not news. And so I don't know that there's a media conspiracy about left or right wing. Some of the things they choose to cover, I think, are trivial, which is and not substantive. I think that's most of my complaint about the media.
I want to go back to the Cruz campaign for a moment. As you said that Senator Cruz, his response to Donald Trump's, let's say, bluster was to respond with policy, to actually challenge him to, match him tit for tat on policy, to move away from personal attacks, things like that. Mm-hmm. Mr. Cruz did not win the nomination. So do you think that there was anywhere where communications went wrong, or what do you think were some factors that led to Mr. Trump getting the nomination?
It's a great point, because I think the Cruz campaign had the best communications team, which I was a part of, and I think we had the best campaign. We were the most organized campaign. We had the largest grassroots organization probably in campaign history. Mm. Yet we were beat by Mr. Trump, who had none of that. He had no grassroots. He had no data, virtually no fundraising operation. I mean, what he did is a remarkable achievement. There's no question about it. He was able to transcend all that. I don't think it will happen again. He's a very unique personality. But the American people, or the people who supported Trump, have made a rational, I think it's a rational decision. It's not a decision I made, but the decision was all the politicians who are versed in policy, mastered the rhetoric, use beautiful language, are eloquent, and can explain everything have just been rejected by by Trump supporters. In other words, we know you're smart and you have all those policies and you speak eloquently about them, and then we elect you, and what happens? Nothing. And they're tired of it. Right. So in a sense, being eloquent in this and being knowledgeable about policy and competent in the affairs of public service worked against Ted Cruz and anybody else who we had all these governors. They were all chief executives, and they all got rejected, and ultimately they chose an outsider, because Donald Trump has positioned himself as the outsider's outsider, where Cruz was still the insider's outsider. And so Cruz got put more into the, you're just another politician, and Trump was put into, he's an outsider we really believe he can shake. That's a rational decision.
I was kind of shocked by that, though, because the Trump campaign, I think, was really able to paint Cruz as an insider, but I think they did it through a couple ways. They said that basically he was dishonest. So Ted Cruz's slogan was "Trust Ted, trusted," and the Trump campaign just said he was lying Ted. When the story around Ben Carson came out, that was certainly a case where they immediately said, Ted Cruz can't be trusted. So I guess my worry is that now that we've heard the story, about Mr. Cruz's speech at the RNC, and the narrative that has been heard, I think, by a lot of people is that Mr. Cruz did a bait and switch, that could make it harder. If he were to run in 2020, that might make it a little bit harder to get that coalition behind.
There was no bait and switch.
But even if there wasn't a bait and switch, if people hear that there was, couldn't that feed more into the narrative, I guess? Is this? Do you think this is working out to be a net negative for Mr. Cruz or net positive for Mr. Cruz?
So in 1988, a Southern governor talked to the Democratic convention. He was booed. He was nearly booed off stage when he said, and in conclusion, the whole auditorium stood up and cheered because he had gone on too long. 4 years later, he was a Democratic nominee and became president of the United States. His name is Bill Clinton. So what was a disastrous speech at the 88 convention by Bill Clinton didn't seem to hurt him at all. Let's say in November, Hillary Clinton wins and Donald Trump loses badly to Hillary Clinton. There would be a summary judgment on Donald Trump that, wasn't that interesting, but that didn't work out. Maybe Ted Cruz was right. Maybe we actually have to stand for something.
But does there have to be a landslide win by Hillary Clinton to show that Ted Cruz is right? Or or where does that fall? If Donald Trump loses by 1% in the popular vote or less, I think it could also be easily possible for people to say, oh, it was people like Ted Cruz, like Marco Rubio, like John Kasich, they're the reason why he didn't win.
The reason a candidate, the elections are hinged on the nominee and the campaign and the candidate themselves. Ultimately, all the decisions that they make and all the decisions of their staffing, who also make subsequent decisions, all fall back to the candidate. It's nobody else's fault. And others are allowed to play too. They're allowed to, say what they want to say and do what they want to do. Donald Trump didn't have to let Ted Cruz speak at the convention. Ted Cruz did not criticize Donald Trump at the convention. And they should have known what would have happened if they allowed him to speak at the convention. They chose a different route. So I don't worry about that. I think ultimately parties do have to believe something, because to me it's not about winning or losing. Win what? So we won the House. What did we win? We won the Senate. What did we win? Nothing's changed. None of the policies. That's why the American people are so frustrated. It's not about winning. It's about winning and implementing. So it remains to be seen if Donald Trump can win, A, and B, if he does win, can he implement? Can he actually change things? And I think the jury's out on that, because Donald Trump has never been a Republican his entire life and doesn't have a track record about Republican principles or actually getting anything done in government. Government is not a business. It doesn't run like a business. You don't say, you do this, you do that, and all of a sudden everybody does that. It's not how it works. It's very, very different from a business. There are no incentives built into government that there are built into a profit model business.
So you went from somebody talking to the media as a communications director to now somebody as a member of the media, right, as a commentator for MSNBC. So where do you see the media's failures in terms of covering campaigns, and where do you think it can get better?
So the viewers determine what media gets watched. In other words, it's about ratings. So if people don't like the way things are covered, they can choose not to watch them. Right, and so that's the free market process. So more people like one network over another, and so the networks have to keep competing to change. And so I do think and hope that the media would cover more issues more substantively, so people that actually understand policies and their implications. Now, it's hard to do that on television because they're trying to get ratings, and so they kind of shorthand everything. Luckily, in the information age, you can go and educate yourself about any number of policy issues, but the media covers the horse race, and they look for candidate mistakes, but that's just the nature of the beast. And so there's really been little substantive policy discussion in this particular race. There was a lot more in the last cycle, so I wish they would cover more of the policy issues and just have people compare policy ideas as opposed to being focused on personalities.
Last thing, Mr. Tyler, I just want to kind of explore this. In this election, we've seen, I think, a shift towards reality TV politics, where how people feel matters a lot more than what a candidate is particularly saying, where people like Donald Trump, that are as brash as they are, can rise to the top in a crowded field. How much of that do you see repeating itself in the next elections going forward, even if we don't have Mr. Trump? And what do you think that might mean for our democracy?
Well, Ronald Reagan was an actor and entertainer. People knew him as an actor and entertainer. He was the president of Screenwriters Guild. He worked for GE Theater. People knew who Ronald Reagan was, and he made the transition successful to be a politician. Similarly, not as successful, but Arnold Schwarzenegger became the governor of the largest state in the Union because people had watched his movies and knew him. Now you have Donald Trump, who people knew from The Apprentice, and he's, through his books, and just he's a larger-than-life personality. And he came in a year when people were just tired of politicians. I do think Donald Trump is unique, though. He just has a almost inexplicable, uncanny ability to generate news. He knows how to generate news. He knows how to get ratings. He knows how to say things that are provocative, that make news. And he got up every morning, called all the shows, and drove the news day just by calling in and giving them something fresh every single day.
But if you're I guess if you're a candidate, couldn't you, if you're running a Republican campaign after Donald Trump, just say, that's the way to win. I've got to dominate the news day. I've got to call into all the shows. Is that something that works for anybody other than Trump?
There's some lessons to be learned. I do think doing the morning shows is important because it does drive the news cycle. But remember, Donald Trump is essentially living out his brand. That is, he says outrageous things, but he's always says outrageous things. We expect him to say outrageous things, and many people want him to say outrageous things because he entertains us. When Marco Rubio tried to live out Donald Trump's brand, it was an ultimate failure because it isn't Marco's brand, it's not who he is, and people are uncomfortable with it. And so you won't have a politician suddenly turn and become like Donald Trump and win. They have to figure out what their own branding is and how make it work for them. But I do think there are lessons to be learned. Donald Trump used Twitter very, very effectively. He used the media and to be able to call into a lot of shows and do a lot of media very, very effectively. He spent relatively little time on the road. I mean, he had the benefit of a jet, so he's able to fly home, virtually every night. I think he only spent, I'd be surprised if he spent a dozen days on the road overnight. So he used that to his advantage, and so every campaign is a little different. Ted Cruz didn't use the media in that way. He went out and worked hard and created a grassroots army, and he was very successful, not quite as successful as Donald Trump.
So I want to close on kind of one final question.
Sure.
If there was anything that you could have changed in terms of how the Cruz campaign operated or how communications was handled, is there anything that you would have done differently?
Oh, sure. You can look back and do that. I don't think there's anything major. I think when Ted closed the campaign, he said, we left it all on the field. I think that's right. I don't think there was any major changes. But, doing the media, doing the morning shows might have worked for us. I don't think it would have been as successful as Donald Trump because they treated him quite differently than they would have treated Ted Cruz. But, it was a year where whoever proved themselves to be the most successful outsider was going to win. Donald Trump won that race. Next cycle may be different.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mr.
All right.
Tyler.
You bet. Thank you.